Viewers slash listeners of the Magic Morning Wood.
Sorry, Ron, I'm
Hi,
gonna have to stop you there. For some
welcome.
reason, we missed your opening in hello. There was no sound. Can you do it again?
Okay, ready? Action. Viewers and listeners. How's that? Was that better?
Brilliant.
All right. So, as I was saying, we're gonna.
Just let him get in
What
out
do you
of
think of
the
that?
system. Yeah,
Just let me get it out of my system.
he'll calm down in a bit.
No, no, no. Yes. So, hi everyone. Welcome to the Magic Morning Wood. And as always, I'm Ron, and with me is. Mm. So, how's it going?
Good. You.
Good, great, excellent.
Fantastic.
Great, great. Best part of the show out of the way. Okay, so as always, we've turned on our algorithm machine. And
Is that the
we're
noise yours makes?
yeah, that's my
Right.
algorithm machine.
I think you need
It farts
new
at the end.
modern minds just to
Yeah.
low hum.
It's lots of like tubes and pistons and
Wow.
yeah, and electric shocks like in Frankenstein's warehouse and workhouse. Workshop. Thank you. That's what I'm
Workhouse,
looking for.
workshop.
Yeah, workout.
Frankie,
His Frankenstein's workout.
Frankie, Freddy.
Anyway, we got Ferguson on the brain, right? So, so we are reacting to Cheech and Chong's Up in Smoke.
Hmm.
Smoke, right? So, uh, so I I can't wait
This
to
better be
talk to
good.
him. So, I was like, okay, well, what am I going to choose to react to Up in Smoke? So I was kind of going through. I was like, well, maybe both Cheech and Chong have their own kind of filmography, sometimes separate from each other.
Hmm.
I'll kind of search through the list of things and just see what they have. And I was interested in going for After Hours, the Scorsese movie,
Ah, that's
which I
why that came up because you asked me if
mm,
I could watch it in time for this, and I couldn't rewatch it. I'd totally forgotten. Are they in it? Is one of them in it?
yes, yeah, they have recurring characters as what are they? Peppy and what's the other guy? I can't remember the name. Something in Peppy where they're
Okay.
that they steal the art and stuff like that and
Okay. I haven't
there's
seen
a
After Hours in forever.
yeah. So anyway, so I was thinking of going to that one, and then I was kept scrolling through, and I came across the Corsican Brothers.
Mm.
Okay, and the Brothers, right? And so the Corsican Brothers, which is the one I chose, 1984, and as soon as I went through it, I was like, the Corsican Brothers. I kind of just went for a second, and suddenly my mind exploded. Right. So now, the reason that I chose this movie was because this movie, now that I've got the chance to, I'm having trouble explaining it. It was like, do you ever have in your life where you have something so from your childhood so buried that you've forgotten about it completely, but when you see something or something sparks it, suddenly like it's like your whole body is awash with like sensory overload of
Yeah. Yeah.
remembering that one thing, right?
Yes, I have.
So
I know what you mean.
this happened to me just scrolling through Cheech's filmography and seeing the words the Corsican Brothers. All
Okay.
right. So now I went through and I was like, the Corsican Brothers, wait. And I kind of clicked on it. I went, oh, like my mind like had like a small dopamine
Mm.
explosion while I was doing it. It was so this movie, I for some reason I unbelievably, I've totally forgotten this movie even existed,
That's
even though I
understandable.
still remember huge chunks of the movie itself,
Oh,
right?
really?
And I mean, I must have had this movie on like VHS. It was one of those ones that you just kind of like, you only had like 10 VHSs at home, or I did anyway, and I would
Mm.
just watch the same movies over and over and over again. So this was
Right.
one of those movies that I watched just over and over. This was my introduction to Cheech and Chong before their drug. This is what I knew them from before they were the druggies,
You
right? And the
you
drug
have my
company.
sympathies.
Well, so, but, and I know you're going to have lots of kind of like snarky, underhanded things, but I would actually say, and I don't
Yeah.
know, and this, it sounds bad to say, seeing this with kind of modern eyes, but a lot of my current sense of humor was shaped by this movie.
Wow.
Right. So yeah, and I know you're gonna go, that makes sense, or you're gonna have some sort of snarky comeback, but it's
I'm
true because
holding it back. I'm
yeah,
holding
I
it
know
back.
you are, but it's there's so many jokes in this movie that I was like, oh my God, that joke, like, oh my God, I kept watching this movie. When I watched this movie, I kept going like, oh my God, I remember this. Oh my God, I was so
Wow.
in this state of like hyper aware
How
shock and
how old
self-awareness.
would you have been when you first saw it then, do you think?
Well, it came out when I was 7, and it probably would have taped it from TV or something like that. So maybe 8 or 9, somewhere around
So
that. And
pre-teens.
yeah, probably preteens, right? So,
Okay.
and I remember like a lot of the bits, like the more kind of sexually charged bits, me not really kind of getting it when I first probably saw it, right?
Uh-huh.
But even like there's even movies like bits of part of this movie that I remember so vividly, but I had sort of I'd attributed them to completely other movies.
Hmm.
Like for example, there's one line where the main antagonist, the Fouquet,
Hmm.
right? Fouquet, who's played by Roy Dotrice,
Hmm.
gets hit in his face with like a bunch of like shit in his face, and
Hmm.
he goes, "I have been hit with shit," right? And it's just like kind of a throwaway line, but that line like lives in my mind, like
Hmm.
for like it's something that I will like say to myself, like like every once in a while, if I like see shit on like shit like dog shit on the street, I'll say to myself, I have been hit, which like it's so ingrained, it becomes like part of my like subconscious.
Uh-huh.
And to the point where I actually thought that line was in History of the World Part One by Mel Brooks, which is obviously not. But for
Ah,
some reason, I had
that would
totally
make
put it
sense.
in it to the point where I just totally didn't even remember this movie even existed, despite the fact that it's such a huge formative. So that's one reason why I wanted to talk about it, because it was so interesting that it was so formative for me, yet so completely gone from my memory as a whole.
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, I just thought that was really, and so, and as I was watching, I was like, it was just like these like constant like dopamine explosions in my mind, like, oh my God, I remember this part. Oh, I remember this part. Like, and just the idea of them, like, so the kind of the main joke of this movie is that they're twins and that they feel each other's pain. That right. So some
Right.
twins, they feel that if one gets hurt, then they both feel it. But this one is sort of like if one gets hurt, the other one feels it instead. So the other,
Right.
so that sort of joke, it plays out. And I remember just as a kid, obviously it was more of a kid's joke, whatever, but just thinking it was so brilliant, and just like seeing like the way they orchestrated the choreography of like, especially like the fight scenes where one would get hurt and would bend over, the other one would bend over, and like the sort of the farcical, kind of slapstick comedy of it. I remember just being just flabbergasted by this when I first saw it. And just it was just sort of like it was so eye-opening and formative for me in terms of my introduction to comedy. And interesting, the white reason it's so interesting is that then the piece itself has disappeared from my mind. So I thought that was one interesting thing about it. And yeah, sure. I mean, you can say a lot of the jokes are kind of fall flat now, and a lot of them don't really work anymore, and it doesn't really hold up that well. But I think it's also interesting to talk about how these two guys, who are known for the stoner, who basically created stoner comedy, did a series of stoner comedy movies, and then as their movie to move away from stoner comedy cho- chose chose a period piece during the French Revolution. Like I think it's such a random choice that I think it's really worth talking about. Don't you agree?
I
No.
mean, no, I, I'm kind of stunned by your level of I mean, understandably so. I'm
Yes,
stunned.
I know that I knew that you weren't having even close to the same kind of thing, right?
No, no, no.
But I mean, I think
So I
this has
don't
a lot
really
to
know
do
what
like.
to.
Hmm.
I don't really know what to say because
Yeah, but the reason, like, and as soon as I saw it, it was like, dopamine explosion. I was like, I have to talk about this movie. I have to watch this movie again. I have to talk about it, right? So,
hmm,
and I knew that you were going to be like, oh, I don't want to watch this movie, and what a piece of shit, and
that's
and
just my
that's
voice.
fine.
It's a perfect
Yeah, yeah,
impression.
because that's exactly what you sound like, right?
That's
So,
right. Oh yeah, it is right. That's
but
right.
except with an accent, which I can't do. So,
Right.
but I don't know. I think in general, even if you don't like the comedy or you don't like this movie, I think it's a really interesting piece of film because it's so random and obscure that, like, why would these two guys, of all the things that they could have done, why would they do this piece,
I
right?
don't know.
So it's
It strikes me as that your reaction to it, of course, is genuine, and you can't take away from that. But it's almost as if you saw it at a time in your life early on, and somehow you'd bypassed. It sounds like you'd bypassed seeing other, I don't know, other slapstick comedies or something like that, or you'd somehow managed to miss all the stuff that I guess influenced them. And for you as a child, it seems like they're the progenitors of it, right? So
exactly, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
so
Which of course
I'm
they
trying to
weren't, of course, but
it's like I'm trying to think if it would be like, I don't know, someone coming from another planet or something and
mm,
landing on Earth, and instead of seeing, like a Rembrandt or something, someone showed them like a doodle on a cereal packet or something, and they'd
right.
be like, wow, because they had no context. Do
Sure.
you know
Yeah,
what I
it's
mean?
possible. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But of course you have to put it, it's not, it's from a child's point of view. And also, I mean, you have to put it in perspective that I probably watched this movie probably 20 times, like over and over and over and over again, right? So, and which is again really more shocking why I didn't even remember this movie existed, but it was, just watching it over and over again, even a terrible movie, if you watch it over and over again, you
Yeah,
have to
absolutely.
build up
Yeah. Yeah.
an appreciation for it in some way.
You just learn the film inside out, and you
You
start
learn it, right? So it becomes
thinking
part
about,
of you, right?
yeah, well, what's that guy doing in that tree in the background, or something you've never thought of
Sure.
before. You just go into, and
Exactly.
like you said, when you're a child and you have a limited amount of stuff, and I would imagine children now don't have this problem.
Yeah, that's whatever,
You
but
do, you get to know something over and over again, whether you like it or not, right?
exactly,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. And of course, I didn't have the discerning eye to
Mm,
know that it maybe wasn't a great comedy, but at the time it was comedy for me. Like it was almost, I would say, probably not necessarily, I don't know exactly the timeline, but it was definitely one of my initial introductions to comedy and what makes a comedy and what comedy
right.
was. Right. So yeah, that's why I thought this was an important thing for me to talk about, right? So in
Okay, well,
this case,
that's
right?
it. I didn't expect that, because that was
Yeah, I know you wouldn't. So that's why I was like, don't worry, we'll talk.
yeah, that
So,
was my main question, because I
yeah.
was thinking, right, okay, it's choosing another Cheech Chong film, fair enough. But I was like, of all the Cheech Chong films you could, why did you go for this one? And I was like, maybe he's a really big Alexander Dumas fan or something like that. And so that kind of explains it. Oddly, I want to strange enough, when I first arrived in Japan in like around 1999, 2000, 2001, both this and the film Yellowbeard, which is another period
Oh
film
yeah.
in, would play TV Tokyo a lot.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know why. For some reason at
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
time they had heavy rotation.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yellowbeard was also like on my list of, I could I remember I'd seen Yellowbeard a couple times. It wasn't as um prevalent in my childhood as this one was,
yeah.
but I'd seen Yellowbeard a couple times and I was like, I'd be interested to kind of revisit that one as well.
It's not too
So,
good, but yeah, I remember Yellowbird. I suppose Yellowbird from my childhood. Not, I didn't see this until I actually, maybe I saw it on TV Tokyo. Maybe, I don't know. But
okay.
so yeah, and as you said, it's their non-drug comedy, right? It's the one where they're
Yeah.
like, okay, we're gonna do it, and yeah, they're doing the Corsican brothers. I'd never read. So the other thing, I have a slight, not prejudice, more of an ambivalence, because I don't hate it, but it's probably worth mentioning just because it colors my thing a little bit. Is I've always had a slightly hard time with that whole Alexander Dumas, like, swashbuckling type
Mhm.
of thing. I don't know where you stand on that, but like, I've never really. So I remember when I was a kid, those Three Musketeers films with Oliver Reed and stuff would play on TV, and all the boys in school would seem to like really be
Yeah.
excited when they were on, and I never got it. And I've tried reading the Three Musketeers, and I tried reading the Corsican Brothers for this because it's a relatively short novel. I don't know if you've ever read,
Really?
but I was just like, it's good writing, but I don't know. There's something, it just does not stick to me.
Right.
Do you, does that help at all? Are you into like the swashbuckler thing?
Of course, I used to like sword fighting and swashbuckling, that kind of thing. I don't think the Three Musketeers was particularly one of my favorite, or even this time period, or Dumas in general. But
Uh,
of course, I liked sword fighting in as much as the next person. Like pirates fighting too, the like Yellowbeard as well, right? That
uh,
kind of
uh,
stuff. As much as any kid does with a stick that want to pretend it's a sword, right? So, but
right.
um, I don't think that was really what drew me to this movie,
Okay.
though. I
Okay.
think
Okay.
so, but I think I appreciated that it was multi-layered, I guess, for a kid, is that it was not just had some action, but also the comedy, I think, right? I'm sure that the comedy was the thing that stuck with me
Right.
most, I think.
Well,
And
let
I
me
even have
tell you.
memories, just one thing, I even have memories of watching it with my mother and
Okay.
seeing my mother's reaction to the jokes. And
Right.
like I have like visceral like reactions to like, oh, that joke made my mother laugh.
Right.
And so it has like, yeah, it's like I'm not sure that I can dissociate that from the actual, merits of the movie itself,
Right.
but
Right.
yeah.
But let me try
Yeah.
and pull something
Mm.
positive out of my experience then, because I don't really feel like shitting over a fond memory of yours. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, I know, I mean, of course, from modern eyes, it's not a great movie. It's not. I mean, obviously, it definitely
well,
left a lot to be
did you
desired. But yeah,
enjoy watching it this time?
but I enjoyed it, the nostalgia of watching it. I think I enjoyed, like I was like bouncing as I was
Wow.
watching it, just because I
Wow.
was so excited to re-experience and to be almost like in touch with my childhood while through watching this,
Okay.
because and almost like it was like discovery, because I was remembering
Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah.
that I had
You found
totally
a missing
buried.
piece, right? You found a missing
Yeah, yeah. And
piece.
so it
No,
was
no, no.
just, it was really exciting for me to watch. But
In
at the
that
same time, I
case,
could,
for you to have that experience, I gladly take the hit, right?
right. Yeah.
Gladly take the hit of having to watch this
Okay.
again, which is something I never would have watched again. But apart from all that, the fact that I found it quite irritating, to be honest with you, massively
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
unfunny. The one thing I took about, so again, looking for positives, I suppose, was watching it this time. It occurred to me that even though I don't necessarily find their brand of comedy that funny, I think Cheech and Chong, especially Cheech, actually, are actually really good performers. And it made me
Hmm.
think like I'd really like to see Cheech Marin, especially in like non-comedic dramatic roles. I
Hmm.
don't know how much they've done that in
Right.
their career, but I feel as if they would actually be really good. Especially the Cheech has this real kind of everyman likability, doesn't he? Like a
Yeah, yeah,
looked
yes.
upon kind
And he
of
plays that up in this one, right? Where he's
yeah,
like, I
yeah.
have a minute to go, right? So
And,
yeah.
and that really struck me as like, fuck, they know what they like. I don't find it funny, but they're actually really quite strong performers, more than just some stoner dudes on a record. Yeah,
Sure.
that you might think, and I appreciated that. So I'm like, okay, I can see, and obviously this film is them. I mean, they don't stray too far away, but it is them trying to kind of do something a bit beyond that, and
Hmm.
widen their palette and prove they can do things. And that's the one thing I was like, I might have a bit of a scroll through Cheech's filmography, especially, and see if there's any like forgotten kind of films
Drama.
where he had a dramatic
Hmm.
role that was
I think
non-comedic.
he does. He
I
was
think
on like
I feel as if he does as well.
I know he was on like a detective drama on TV for years, I think, wasn't he?
I don't know, but I'm
Yeah.
having big kind of memories. I'm sure I've seen him play the straight man and be really good at it. So, um, yeah, if we were reacting to this film next, then I
Yeah.
might have done that,
Right.
we're not.
Hmm.
So I'll have to
Yeah, we're
wait
done.
for another
Yeah,
time,
right. So
maybe.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, anyway, so I mean, we didn't really talk about the movie itself, I guess, right? But directed by Tommy Chong,
yeah,
right? Yeah, and sort of tells the story of these brothers, twins who are kind of separated. So they're, again, as I said, they one gets hurt and the other one feels it. And so they have kind of, I mean, just the images of them as babies, like the mom comes over and looks in the crib, and they're like basically these like hairy grown-ups, but like in baby clothes and stuff, like right, and her going and running away,
That's
like just like
quite Wayans brothers, that stuff.
yeah. Well, I think pre-Wayne's
Yeah,
brother, I think
exactly,
Wayne's brother
exactly. Yeah, 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 the way
probably
around.
stole
Yeah,
from us, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then, and then as the toddlers hitting themselves on each other on the head and relay and sort of emphasizing that that's and like that kind of thing, right? Just yeah, it was yeah. Anyway, I think it was generally pretty well done in that case. I mean, what they were trying to do and their sort of limitations of performers, I thought it was, I think they did a half decent job with telling that story and doing it in their own particular way. Um, Again, I think it's just such a strange choice that of all the stories that they could have chosen to break away from their stoner kind of personas, that they would choose this one. I thought it was just it's so random. Yeah, so I think it's just such a odd choice.
I'm wondering if it's maybe not quite as random. If you think about, like you mentioned, History of the World Part One, that would have been quite a recent thing, and
Sure.
Start the Revolution Without Me. I think it was a bit of a trend for the period comedy.
Right.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah,
But for these two though, I mean, you don't really associate these two with a period comedy, right? So,
right, right.
yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
they're
So
Alexander Dumas fans.
yeah, it could be, yeah. Anyway, so then yeah, then they get separated when they're kids, and then they kind of come back together as adults, and it's just interesting that Tommy Chong in this movie is actually, despite that it's kind of a comedy, he's quite like intense and serious for a good section of it, where he plays the revolutionary, and for the most part, he's sort of the straight man, where he's just sort of like Cheech has most of the kind of like the throwaway kind of punchlines, whereas he's very like, oh, that's oh, bro, come on, brother. He's very kind of serious, which is kind of interesting that they chose that situation, but. Anyway, I particularly enjoyed Roy Treese in this movie, who's just kind of like I think he was sort of a formative villain for me as well. I think, making these kind of like, mustache twirling kind of villain, and Roy Treese actually, again, bringing things roundabout, is sort of became kind of, I became quite into the Song of Ice and Fire, like the Game of Thrones book series,
Uh-huh.
a few years ago. And Roy Dotrice actually did the audiobooks for this, and
All right.
he was a good friend of George R. R. Martin. So yeah, so I sort of had this other, oh, it's Roy Dotrice, like, well, like I did totally forgotten he was even in that movie. So that came also brought things kind of full circle for me a little bit too. Um, so, and that voice, right? So anyway, so
Free
yeah,
Don
it's
Tong turns up briefly.
yeah, Ray Don Chong, yeah, and his whole family is Shelby Chong is one of the
Mm.
princesses, right? So, but yeah, so I mean, yeah, it's not a great movie, but for me, it was just a such an exciting watch for me just to revisit this again, just because, so, and I wouldn't say it was necessarily let down. There were still parts where I was like, I was still laughing out loud because but I'm not sure if it was laughing because it was funny or because I thought it was funny or because of the nostalgia. It could be a little bit of both, but I still
Right.
thought a couple things held up, right? So anyway, I knew you were going to kind of like groan, mumble and groan about this kind of thing, but, I was so happy to revisit this and rediscover a part of it. So,
Yeah, no, no,
yeah.
no, and I'm touched by that. So that's why I've kept my mumbling and groaning to a minimum
Right.
because yeah, I can always mumble and groan. I'm sure
Yeah.
you'll choose something else that'll cause me to mumble and groan.
Yeah,
So
yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
all right.
Yeah. But yeah, but again, my like a lot of the jokes that I appreciate in modern comedy, I can almost like kind of find a direct line back to this movie where I first experienced them in this movie. And
Mm.
then that type of comedy, that trope that I can now appreciate now. So it was really formative for me. So I'll say that. So anyone who is interested in finding like an early comedy that's a real kind of oddball, I think it's quite of an interesting kind of piece because of the um the connection between like this sort of like period comedy piece with these stoner guys who are totally like out of place in France, and one's Mexican, and it's very, I don't know, I just think it's such an odd little piece that I was happy to.
And of course, they are Los Guys
Those guys, yeah, yeah, yeah.
in the
Oh yeah, that part was like, oh my God, those guys, yeah, yeah, yeah. And like the side of the truck coming down and them playing stuff, like, oh man, like so like, yeah, I was like, oh my God, everyone. So like, yeah, yeah, it was like finding a photo album, you know what I mean? It was, yeah,
right,
in your attic,
right.
yeah. So it was weird. Mm.
Okay, there we go then.
Anyway, so I won't go on about that any much longer. So
Right. So my reaction was via. Actually, did you figure it out, or were you wondering what the fuck's this got to do with Up in Smoke?
I'm sure it's something to do with someone in the crew.
No, it was actually not enough. We didn't talk about it, I think, when we talked Up in Smoke, which is why. So in Up in Smoke, Tommy Chong's father is played by Strother Martin,
Hmm.
and Strother Martin is in My Choice. That's what it was. And I,
Okay.
I was thinking Strother Martin, obviously, I suppose most famous now for being in Sam Peckinpah movies, and I was thinking about maybe choosing a classic Sam Peckinpah film to go back to, but I thought, here's a film in his filmography which I've always been keen to see, but I kind of couldn't remember why. So this is The Secret, or The Secret Life of Nikola Tesla from 1979, Yugoslav film. Um, and this is one of those films that cropped up uh, that I remembered I'd wanted to see, and it was on my list, and I had a copy, but I couldn't remember specifically why I wanted to see it exactly. So I'd never seen this before, going in cold. I'm assuming you'd never seen it before as well.
No.
And yeah, so Strother Martin plays George Westinghouse. He also has Orson Welles as J.P. Morgan.
Yeah.
And someone else, Dennis something or other, Dennis plays Edison, right? But our main Serbian actor playing the Serbian Nikola Tesla is Petar Bozovic, right? And yeah, so basically well, so first off, before we get into, did you have did the because you watched a different version from me, because you
I
were
watched the YouTube version.
yeah, you watched the one on YouTube, and so your version, it didn't have the intro, which is in Serbian, right? Before the film starts.
I don't believe so. I can't remember, but I don't think so.
Did it have like an interview with a guy in Burbank, California, who claimed to have known Tesla during the last 6 months of his life? And then did you see the Tesla wedding, the Tesla cult wedding? Did you see that?
No, no, I didn't see that.
Okay, so yeah, so that seems to be missing from the version you saw, because I went to check, because those things are unsubtitled in the version, and most of the film is in English, apart from some flashbacks, which are in
Yeah, some
Serbian. Yeah,
random scenes that are in other languages with no subtitles. So
yeah, but they don't last very long. But I was
yeah,
curious as to see if you had subtitles for them, and I didn't. So I went back and I noticed, oh, this film starts. Your version started at the credits, right? Um, but yeah, the longer version has this weird stuff at the beginning where there's like, yeah, a kind of modern cult of Nikola Tesla who give like wedding ceremonies or something like that.
yeah,
And it's all in Serbian, so I have no idea what they were. I don't know the exact details.
right.
The cult was in the United States, so the people were speaking English, and it seemed to be like some kind of wedding ceremony or something. But the narration that was putting into context, I don't understand. So,
Okay.
so that bit was kind of peculiar. But you didn't see
Yeah,
any
no.
of
No, I didn't see it, so I don't.
that. Okay, okay. So yeah, so what you saw was because that's only a little bit. You saw pretty much the bare bones. It's the Nikola Tesla story, right? So
Right. Yes.
comes to America, kind of genius, you know, the guy who is a real champion for alternating current. but
Mhm.
of course, Edison and Westinghouse are very much pro direct current and kind of yeah, and so it's basically the famous kind of story that everyone kind of more or less knows the shape of, which is Tesla was this kind of genius guy who was maybe held back somewhat by, you know, greater forces who wanted a monopoly on
Right.
the market, regardless of whether their product was better or not. See also Beta versus VHS, I guess.
And
Yeah.
also, Microsoft versus Apple.
Right, right. Um, yeah, and also his increasingly kind of eccentric behavior, like him not wanting to shake hands and stuff because they think he disturbed energy fields, and he's kind of very OCD, and he might be a bit of a seer or something. He thinks he sees things, so he's so I would say overall it's a fairly it's not too bad in terms of like a hagiography. I don't think they make Tesla out necessarily to be like a real amazing hero who was that hard done by
Hmm.
evil people, because the other characters in the film kind of are reasonable enough, and you can understand why this queer little man would have turned
Hmm.
some people off. Like, well, we can't
Right.
throw all our money on him because he sees things and he won't shake your hand and shit like
Right.
that, right? So I'd say it's a fairly, not knowing too much in detail, I've read a bit about. I would say it's a fairly even-handed uh, telling of the story. Um, Problem is, I think so. Yeah, this is an interesting one. I hmm, how to. I think it's a pretty interesting little film. The Tesla story is quite interesting. The guy playing Tesla is pretty good. Um, the problems are, I think, so it's clearly they clearly don't quite have enough of a budget to do
Hmm.
it properly, right? So
Right. Right.
it's not embarrassing, and the more you get into the film, you kind of you acclimatize to it, but you can tell that they only just kind of got away with getting like, if the camera just moved a little bit, you'd see like the fray around the edges or something.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So they've only just got the production values, and then there's the weird thing about, I don't know quite how this worked, but like, so the the director and writers are served. It's directed by like Christo Papic, written by Eva Bresson and Eva Kusan. But then they seem to have had people have translated the script into English for the English speaking actors, right?
Mhm.
For instance, Orson Welles, Strother Martin, and those people,
Right.
right? Also worth mentioning that the woman playing the kind of not really love interest already married woman who takes a fancy to Tesla,
Hmm.
Oja Koda, she was Orson Welles's romantic partner in real life. He was still
Hmm.
married to another woman, technically, but he lived with her until his death in like 85. And the reason I'm totally coincidentally, I happen to know this is because I've been reading a book called My Lunches with Orson, which is the director Henry Jaglom, towards the end of his life, was going to lunch with Orson Welles all the time, and
Hmm.
there's a book out of their conversations which he recorded.
Hmm.
So yeah, Odja, Orson Welles refers to this Odja person all the time, and yeah, it's the woman in this film.
I see.
Um, and yeah, so some things happened somewhere along the way, right? I think from the translation from the original language to the English, and then obviously you have someone who English isn't their first language directing the film,
Hmm.
and sometimes it's on-set sound, but sometimes it's not. It's overdubbed. So
Yeah.
there's something. not quite right, isn't it? Like you're in slightly uncanny valley territory, right? You're not
Right.
quite, it's not quite right, mixed with the production design isn't quite there, and the
Mm.
story is quite slow moving. So, and it's got I quite like the soundtrack, but I don't know if it's the right soundtrack for this film. It's like
Right. Yeah.
horror movie organ thing, and
Uh,
yeah, I like it, but I don't know if it's right for that. And there's a lot of that in this film actually, where there's bits of it that feel almost like the director is wanting to make a horror film or a science fiction film or something. There's like this
mm,
scene as well when they dwell on like these really beautiful sketches that he's drawn, and they just look at them for ages, but it looks
mm,
like 50s sci-fi art or something,
mm.
And and then it felt as if the director was like pepping up, and like I don't know, I just got the feeling that they didn't necessarily want to tell a drama. They wanted to tell like a horror or science fiction or super a story or something like that. Um, so it's an odd one. It doesn't really totally work by any in any way, shape, or form. It's not awful either. I would hesitate to say it's not boring. It's sometimes boring, but overall, it's it was quite interesting. So
Mm.
it's an odd one. I thought it was an odd one. But what did you feel
Yeah.
about this film?
Um, the thing that stuck out for me was that I felt like I was watching like a Yorgos Lanthimos film where
Ah, interesting.
it was like everyone in the film was instructed to never give any emotion or intonation to your lines whatsoever. Everyone read everything completely flat and emotionless. With the exception of like Orson Welles, who just
Yeah,
comes in and does everything with his naturalness that Orson Welles does. And I couldn't tell if it was because they were sort of told to do it that way or if it was just through like maybe inexperienced actors or whatever. But I mean, but it was just very like what am I like, why is there no emotion in this entire film? Like everything was like, hello, my name is Nikola Tesla. Hello,
it
Nikola
is.
Tesla. Like
It is
it
quite
was like
flat, isn't it? Yeah.
it was really hard to watch, and the flatness kind of like um drew some of the joy out of it for me. I'm interested in general in these types of stories,
Hmm.
and like the underdog, but the brilliant underdog who kind of makes good, and or no, but it still is kind of pushed down by the man, that kind of stuff. In general, it's sort of like a well-worn but still interesting trope. Um, and I think they told the story relatively well. I mean, I got the general gist out of it. I don't know how true all of it is, or
Right.
if it's
Right.
if some of it seemed like it must be to some degree mythologized, like but like
But
him
I get the
digging. I'm
feeling
sure he probably did dig ditches, but was he like pulled out of the ditch to go,
like
I
literally,
mean, I
yeah.
feel like it was probably not that dramatic, you know what I mean?
Right.
So
But also, I get
it
the
was,
feeling as well that it's very aware of because there's a frame. It's weird as well. The framing device comes and goes. So like he's being interviewed as an older man by
yeah,
a journalist, and clearly he's losing his marbles a little bit. So he is an
right,
unreliable narrator. So I think you're supposed to not be
kind
sure
of,
if
yeah,
some of the
not
things,
sure, yeah, so
but it
yeah.
does have a very like non-abrupt non-ending, right?
Yeah,
Just
just interesting.
ends. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's like, okay. And
yeah,
then that music comes in again, and you're like,
yeah,
what's this music all about then?
yeah,
I quite like it, but what's it got to do with this? It's a very strange. It's a very strange item.
yeah.
It's not.
I mean, it wasn't horrible, but it was not great either. I guess I would say. Yeah. So yeah, it was yeah. So but and I do think Orson Welles kind of stuck out like a sore thumb in this movie. It was I don't know how they ended up with Orson Welles in their film, but it gave a little bit of credibility to a movie which would ordinarily be kind of like
Oh yeah,
completely forgettable. Yeah, but
Clearly,
yeah, I'm not sure.
he's the big ticket, isn't it? They're lucky to have got
I guess.
him,
Yeah.
and via him as well, they kind of got the sort of leading lady, I suppose they wanted as well. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe he pushed her on them. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a kind of interesting example of how sometimes I think that countries have their own cinematic traditions and non-cinematic
Mm.
traditions as well, right? And you can see how maybe if they'd have just done the entire film in Serbian with Serbian actors, it might have made a bit more sense somehow.
Right.
But this
Yeah.
kind of it exists in this strange netherworld between, like, it didn't seem it's America, it's filled with American characters speaking American, but it felt very un-American, this film.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
didn't really seem like a Serbian film either. It just kind of
Mm.
exists on this weird little plane.
I don't know. It just felt to me very kind of like paint by numbers. Like they'd gotten an autobiography. Okay, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. Okay, we need this scene, this scene, this scene, this scene. And there was no real kind of like spark or joy or vision. It was just sort of like they wanted to tell the story, and here's the script that tells the story, and
Yeah,
then they just script and they just read the lines, and then they stand in their spot, and they. So it just felt very kind of like, you know, it was just kind of wooden. It told the
yeah,
story it was
yeah.
supposed to, but there was no real like
Well,
zhuzh to it. You know what I
I
mean?
think, like
So it
I said,
was
the only times it occasionally threatened to like be in some way inspired was when it seemed to be going into another genre from the soundtrack on, right? It's
yeah,
like that's when I felt like, oh, hang on now, this might be, but it's like, but that's a different film, right? Like that's not
yeah, yeah,
this
yeah,
film. So,
yeah.
which I kind of found interesting. Like I said, I wasn't as when it started for the first 5-10 minutes, I thought, this is going to be a bit of a chore. Actually, after the first that weird stuff at the beginning, because that was kind of interestingly weird. And then when it settled down, I thought, is this going to be quite boring? And I was surprised it wasn't as boring, flat out
Mm. It
boring
had
as I
moments
thought
where
it
it
would
was
be.
fine, despite the fact it
Yeah,
was flat and it
yeah,
was sort of like ba 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 ba. There were still moments that I was interested in. I
yeah,
assume that I couldn't tell really what was interesting about it because it wasn't really the performances or this. I guess maybe it's just that I'm still interested in these types of stories, maybe. So,
right, right.
yeah. But I mean, there's a reason, I guess, that it's on YouTube and not on Netflix. I guess though.
Well, the
Yeah.
chief of that though is probably the fact that I don't know if there's a decent high definition print.
Print of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, print
So,
of it. Yeah. So yeah. So or there's a reason probably there's no high definition print of it. So
but anyway, there we go.
but
A
it was an interesting
curiosity.
little find.
Curiosity. Yeah. Yeah.
It was a curio. Yeah.
Okay. So until next time then on the Magic Morning Word, where we'll be responding to The Secret Life of Nikola Tesla. Bye bye.
Bye.